the lady, well, unfortunately, was very, very, very heavy, virtually obese, told the judge how she was losing weight because of the intolerable cruelty of the husband, and the judge leaned over to her and said, "You should stay married a little bit longer." We're beyond that, fortunately, in a lot of ways.
That must have been the old days.
That was the old days. We had to have two witnesses and do that, but once again, you don't do that. And in some states, the fault enters into essentially the property distribution. In other states, I think in New York, for instance, you have to show fault in order to get a divorce still, but you don't show fault in dividing up assets. Connecticut, which is another state I was familiar with, didn't have to show fault to get divorced, but you had to show fault in the division of assets. But once again, do you think how does this really influence the number of people getting divorced, or the people's perception of divorce?
Well, I think if one does not need to prove fault, I think it's easier for people to go through the divorce process because, first of all, it must have been quite expensive to prove fault. You would either have to hire a Chinatown private detective, or you'd have to get a forensic accountant to go through the financial records to demonstrate that assets were dissipated, or some such thing, and so that would make the process more arduous, I would think. And people, even though they might be unhappy, may have hesitated to end a marriage if fault was involved. And so with no fault, it's easier to say this isn't working, and we would be, better off not together. That's my guess as to why the divorce rate may have increased once fault no longer needed to be proved.
Just as you were saying that, sort of reminded me, Marie, we were talking about is that Arizona also has what's called covenant marriages. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And because that sort of influences the cultural factors as well.
You'll have in one of your future shows someone who can really talk with more expertise than I about the details of covenant marriage. But, the culture has definitely changed, as you've noted, and one of the reasons I know that is because the legislature has now created covenant marriage. That did not used to exist in the state of Arizona, and it is a special type of marriage where you make certain extra promises to each other that make getting divorced more difficult again. There's a group of people who believe that it shouldn't be so easy to get divorced, and that marriage is a valuable to society, and you have the opportunity now to choose a different type of marriage where you have to jump through more of those hoops, and it does take longer and cost more to get divorced. So there are people trying to get back to that old culture who think it's an important thing.
That's good. I was just wondering, though, once again, having lived through a lot of these things, whether there were other factors which have, you alluded to the women working in the workforce of that one, but I sometimes go back to, once again, the sort of the 60s lifestyle where a lot of things were changing, where there was drugs and a view of life. Do you think that had any influence at all on how we look at divorce? Women's liberation, for instance, or some of those issues that came up at that point, and it certainly affected the job market, but is women's perceptions of I
think there may be something to that, in the sense of people feeling empowered and having a sense that their life should be full and rich, and that they don't need to tolerate a life that doesn't provide for them to be able to really enhance themselves, completely. So that's possible.
I also thought it's interesting when we did the study years ago that 2/3 of the women were plaintiffs or petitioners for the divorce in a divorce case, and I'm wondering once again whether that was the case. And I also noticed in a lot of the mediation cases we had that once again women were making more money.
Well, but there has been research also that has said that men are more desirous of being married than women are, and so that may contribute to the fact that women are more likely to be plaintiffs. Men feel a need to be married, not necessarily to that person, but married, and so perhaps that keeps them from...
Have you seen you think there's any cultural change or societal change on that, or that's been fairly consistent over the last 100 years? of men wanting to be married more than, or more willing to stay in a marriage?
I don't know. The studies are of sort of modern day, so I don't know whether that's changed or not.
The other thing I was just wondering too, also, is some of the other factors, societal things over the last years that have been big factors, are, changing the abortion laws, changing in birth control rules. Do you think, once again, that has had any influence at all in how people perceive divorce, or how it affects the divorce population?
I haven't really thought that much about whether those particular issues would have impacted divorce. I think in terms of the custody piece, certainly the prevalence of a more equal time with children for fathers and mothers, it definitely can be attributed to a culture where men and women both are out of the house working and have limited time to parent, not like a previous generation where women were perhaps more at home and were the primary parent. That I have certainly seen as a big impact.
I mean, we're in the middle of a political presidential race, which brings to mind, how, once again, maybe an indicator of how people perceive divorce was that until, I think, Ronald Reagan, and it's they always talk about the Reagan Revolution, but Reagan was the first person elected president who had actually been divorced before. And then Adlai Stevenson ran back in '52, and he was divorced, and it was a problem. And I thought it was sort of interesting that now, we had Giuliani running and Kerry running, who had both been divorced. It was virtually, seemed to be...
And McCain.
McCain, that's true, I've forgotten McCain too. Virtually a non-issue. But once again, I'm not sure what came first here. Is that we've liberalized, or our perception of divorce has changed, or once again, so that it's more acceptable, or is there something else going on here that we're not aware of?
I think it's definitely more acceptable, and it's not a taboo to be divorced. And I'm not sure that if you look at Barack Obama, his family history and that of his mother and his father and the book he wrote about him really are indications that we've risen above some of those issues, and they're not the stigma that they used to be. You can be a successful person from a single-parent home, from a broken home, from a divorced home, from stepchildren and sisters and brothers, and that I don't think that those issues are maybe the black mark they once were.
I think also when you start getting into statistics that say that 50% of all marriages end in divorce, it's pretty hard to stigmatize something that's going to happen to almost everybody one of us knows. And I suspect that has contributed also, because while we may not experience divorce, we can be pretty certain that somebody in our families will, if 50% of people are getting divorced.
This has been a fascinating conversation. We're going to have to continue it again more in the future, but we are running out of time. And I want to thank you, Marie and Mary, for being on our program and discussing the culture of divorce. And this has been an interesting program, certainly a little bit different than our average one. Once again, check out our website if you want to learn more about, which is at the bottom of the screen, about future shows. I won't try to go through. For information about our guests, check this.